Riot continues on the arc of cooking. And what I mean by this is, if you remember a couple months ago, Riot came out and said they were going to be looking at Valorant as a whole and trying to make some changes that would overall impact the game as we know it. And the first couple of changes were centered on Duelist, and now we have gotten a little bit into the Sentinel changes. However, they also took this opportunity to introduce a game-changing mechanic that seemed to be broken when it was first teased. And now that we've had some chance to play with it, I truly don't think the Regen Shield is that game breaking. So it wasn't a formal statement that Riot made that said, hey, by the way, we're coming out with this new feature, get ready. It was teased in the video that they made for Phoenix, people picked up on it, and so obviously, like most things on the internet, it quickly blew up. It became this frenzy of, oh my god, this new feature is going to be broken, Valorant as we know it is going to change, like what are they cooking? The typical meme of, I thought Valorant was supposed to be a tactical shooter, this is gonna break the game, like, you know, I'm hopping off of Valorant, never touching this game if this feature actually comes out. Now, it did come out, and honestly, I think it's perfectly fine. So for the specifics, it's 650 credits. The way it works is it acts as a light shield in the sense that you have 25 hit points, similar to a light shield. However, in contrast, you have a separate pool of 50 health points, and those 50 health points are important because anytime your shield gets damaged or broken, after a 5-second interval, it will begin to recharge, dipping into that 50 health point pool. This is important because this is what differentiates it from a light shield. So essentially, this allows you to peek, to take some damage, get back into cover, recharge your shield, and peek once again. So there are some benefits, but it doesn't have the overall benefit that a heavy shield has of allowing you to live a headshot from certain weapons. Truth be told, after getting a couple of matches in, it's really the middle ground of being useful in a forced round, where you have more credits than the rest of your team, but if you were to fully buy your kit out right now, you won't have enough for the following round, and that's when your team has enough to buy everything that they need. So you're saving, but you're also forcing. And normally you would either debate between getting a sheriff or a stinger and a heavy shield, right? A lower weapon, but a higher shield, or vice versa. You might go for a bulldog, a guardian, a middle pack, or perhaps even pick up a vandal, but go with the light shield, so that you have enough money going into the following round to get, buy with your team and make sure that you're all in the same kits. Now that the Regen Shield is an option, it gives some more versatility, which is really what Riot wanted to have happen when they introduced this feature. Now you have that option of buying a shield that is slightly better than the light shield, isn't as good as heavy shield, but it's that middle ground, which lets you move around and use different weapons, which is what they wanted from this. They made mention that they want people to use some of those middle of the pack weapons, like your bulldog, your guardian, the outlaw, your marshal, right? Like, these weapons typically don't get that much usage in a game because instead of debating, do I want a middle weapon but a light shield, or do I want a heavy shield but a low shield, now you have that middle shield option. And so this is actually game changing in the sense that it gives more versatility. It means you're playing different rounds that you previously weren't able to play before. So I think this change is good. It is by no means as broken as a lot of people were making it out to be. So kudos to Riot on this one. I think they cooked with this feature. Now, the rest of the patch consists of agent changes, and while I would love to dive into every single one of these, there's really only 3 that I would like to touch upon today. The first one being the Cypher change. So to get it out of the way, Cypher's ult received an increase by 1. So now instead of requiring 6 orbs, it requires 7. I think this change was very needed. I think Cypher's ult is really good, and I think they're in a tough position because you don't necessarily want to nerf the actual ability itself. They made mention that, if you remember, it was only recently that they made the change to Cypher, where instead of just being 1 ping after using the ult, you got 2 pings. And I think this change was needed. I think his original ultimate was not as useful as it made out to be. Obviously, being able to ping the enemies regardless of where they're on the map is powerful, and that's why it's an ultimate.
Give me a... Where is everyone hiding? My ultimate is ready.
Someone's behind you guys. Brother. But that second ping was needed. It was required. If they were to revert that back to that 1 ping structure that was in place when Cypher first came out, it would be too big of a nerf. And so by increasing the cost for the ultimate, I think it's in the right direction. I truthfully think that it'll probably end up making one more jump to 8 and falling in line with some of those more impactful ultimates, like your Raze ult, for example. I think Cypher's is about that area instead of the 7, but we have yet to be seen. We'll see how much this changes. But the real big change, the change that I personally really am looking forward to, was the change to his tripwire. Recently, the meta has changed a lot to counter Cypher. His tripwires received the buff, and ever since they did, his setup on sites have become almost impenetrable unless you have certain agents with certain abilities that can get rid of those tripwires with minimal risk. We're talking about your Sova shock darts, your Raze nades, abilities that can from a distance take out this utility. However, now they've added a versatility, they've added an option, which is now whenever you proc the tripwire, you have a 0.5 second windup, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it really is. It had a 0.5 second windup where you trigger the tripwire, Cypher gets the notification that, hey, somebody's on your tripwire, but he doesn't immediately get the wall hack. And this is important because it allows for counterplay. Now you have the option of smoking where the tripwire would be, intentionally proccing that tripwire and taking it out instantly. It means that by yourself, anybody, regardless of what agent they're playing, can go up to the tripwire and take care of it. Now, obviously, it has to be intentional and there's still a little bit of coordination required, and so your better option is still using something like the Raze nade or the Sova shock dart, but now there's a way to play around it. It's not necessary for your team composition to consist of certain agents to counter Cypher. I think this windup before the wall hack takes effect is probably going to increase, but I think this is a perfect direction for Cypher. I think Cypher's kit as a whole is very hard to manage because if you really think about it, his kit is very basic at the core, and so any little change to his kit can directly impact his usage rate. And Cypher at one point was considered a weaker Sentinel. Killjoy was dominating when it came to Sentinels for a while, and now Cypher is the choice that you want to use. And so this shift has come because obviously Cypher's kit has gotten buffs, but I think instead of nerfing those abilities directly by what they do, instead it should be a nerf to how they can be counterplayed. And so I think this is a good direction. Another kudos for Riot. Phoenix essentially got a rework during this patch, and honestly, I'm here for it. So now instead of his signature ability being his fire orb that allows him to heal and do damage to the enemy, he now is guaranteed a flash, and I think this is perfect. Phoenix is meant to be an aggressive agent, having a flash available round 1 from the very beginning, and it recharges after usage. So even if you don't buy that second flash, you still have the possibility of getting a second flash during the round, and I think this is a perfect change. It makes his character more consistent, and it incentivizes people to use Phoenix if you need a flash, because there isn't that much of a buy-in for it. And on top of that, his healing ability, as you know, Phoenix is one of the few agents that can heal himself. However, in the past, it was required for you to either sit on top of your fire orb or sit within your fire wall, and that would allow you to heal over time, but you would be anchored to that position. And this always seemed counterintuitive. How are you going to have a duelist that is meant to be aggressive, and especially Phoenix, whose whole kit is designed for him to be aggressive and ego chow a lot and be able to heal himself back up so he can continue doing that? How are you going to anchor this agent as a requirement for his healing when the whole kit seems to be revolved around that? Now, as long as you step into it, even if it's for 1 or 2 seconds, it'll proc that healing, and that healing will take place over time, regardless of whether you're actually within that ability. That change in and of itself, huge. I think Phoenix has become already significantly more viable, and I'm excited to see what people cook up with Phoenix. I think this change was much needed. I really think this rework has gone well, and the more minor change being that his Phoenix wall now acts a little bit to how Harbors is deployed, to where it can go through objects, which I think this just adds to the consistency of the game. It's always weird whenever an ability is similar to another one but works entirely different than that other ability. So this is just more consistency on the game, consistency for his kit, consistency overall for how rounds can be played. Phenomenal decision. Another kudos to Valorant. And the last change that I want to talk about is the change that Sage got specifically because of some of the things that it alludes to. We'll get it out of the way. Sage's ultimate was actually reduced by 1. So now it means that you can res your teammates a lot quicker during a match. And I think this decision, great decision. Will it come to bite everybody back eventually? Could be. But I think for now, the reasoning makes sense. They made the point that Sage has seen a significant decrease in pick rate. And I think this makes sense. As new agents come out, the different kits are more versatile. There's more incentive to use different kits. There's also more value depending on team composition. I think Sage, if you've been around for Valorant's history, was a staple very early on in the game, and since then has kind of dwindled down. I think her ultimate was always viewed as being of high importance and high value, and so this decrease will be phenomenal to make sure that she has a better pick rate. And you'll also remember that Sage has the option to heal herself, but like I think it was about a year or two ago now, she received a monumental nerf to that ability, to where the ability itself shifted. Riot wanted it to be more focused on healing her teammates rather than herself, and so they heavily nerfed her self heal, which it seems that they're slowly starting to revert back to what it used to be. So now her self heal heals her a little bit more, and it also after a couple of seconds will speed up, meaning that she will heal herself at a much faster rate and at a better rate, and allow for her to be slightly more aggressive. But the ability that I actually want to focus on is actually her slow orb. It's no surprise to anybody that currently one of the most problematic duelists, or agents in general, is Neon. Neon's dash and her change to her dash, allowing for her to have a better accuracy percentage when she's sliding, has made her very problematic. And I don't think this was intentional. I don't think Riot anticipated that people would pick up on this, but there are some cracked players that have figured out how to make Neon work to a more aggressive playstyle. And kudos to them, truly. I mean, you know, phenomenal choice on their end for taking the time to figure that out, but it is causing problems. And I think there's obviously a juggling act that they have to perform with each agent and figuring out how to keep them balanced. And while you can directly go and nerf Neon, it seems like that's not what they want to do, and it's understandable. But Sage's orb, her slow orb, received a change in which now the slow orb itself will reduce dash distance, and this really only affects Neon and Jett. For Jett, you still have the option to updraft and dash and completely avoid the orb altogether. But for Neon, this is important because now you can slow orb in anticipation for a Neon push and delay that Neon push to allow your team to set up better. And this is important because Neon's current playstyle depends on you being able to counter her to some extent. Her slide is very consistently not something that you can counter. Most players cannot counter a good player on a Neon and the movement that Neon provides to that player. And so I think this slow orb is one of many steps I hope that Riot will implement to start attacking the pressure that Neon has placed on the overall Valorant environment. So, like I said, second patch of a long series it seems to be that Riot has planned to make these bigger changes to Valorant. I think it's much needed. I think Valorant has been in a somewhat stale place for a little bit. Obviously, it hasn't helped that there have been certain agents and even playstyles that have dominated the way that Valorant has been played recently. But I think as these changes are implemented, as new features are implemented, they're going to make changes that are going to freshen up what Valorant is. And so I'm excited for this. Let me know if you're excited for it as well. Let me know what you thought about these changes. What do you hope Riot does next? And I will see you guys for the next video. Peace out.